Day to you viewers, the Colonel speaking to you live from the Preceptory of British Imperial YouTube Broadcasting. Now, I've got an interesting set of records. There are 6 sides on 3 records. And it's Brunswick RT1, RT2 and RT3. Yes, RT is for arties. And they are swing music, conversations about jeers. Number 1, part 1 and 2, number 2, parts 1 and 2, and number 3, parts 1 and 2. By Leonard Hibbs, with some records, it says here. So, I should stress that the views expressed here are not necessarily the views of the management, i.e. myself, but if you know the Harry Enfield sketches involving Mr. Chumley, Warner and Grayson, you may be forcibly reminded of them with these records. You may also think they're talking an awful lot of bunk, in which case it's a bit like me. Here we go.
What is this swing music? That is the question I hope to answer by means of this record and those that will follow it. Swing is the obvious word to use to describe a perfect rhythmic performance. It comes as naturally to the pen of the critic of serious music as it does to the pens of those who review our jazz. We use the word rhythm a great deal because for us rhythm is the most important element of our music, while in most other forms of music it is but one of several factors of equal or even greater importance. For example, your medium brow's first consideration is a good tune, but we can find unending delight in just one fixed rhythm, and when that rhythm takes possession of some elemental thing inside us, we say it swings. Now I will play excerpts from 2 records of a tune called the original Dixieland One-Step. The first example dates back from 1927 and is played by Red Nichols and his 5 pennies. Red began a completely fresh page in the history of jazz when he recorded performances that were perfect little gems of rhythmic improvisation, but which lacked that little extra something called swing. I'd like you to listen very carefully to this first example and the one that follows it, because the difference between the two, and there is a noticeable difference, is swing. By the way, the second example is played by the New Orleans Rhythm Kings. Here's number 1. Just a moment and I'll play the second example. You will agree that there is a difference between the two. My job is to define that difference. And it's not an easy one. If you pop the question to the average keen fan, he'll dismiss it with the reply that the second disc was made by boys who could swing it better than the first group. That reply is quite good enough for him because he believes in the jazz idiom. Personally, I think we can approach the root of the matter by accepting the old-fashioned idea that a dance band is divided into 2 sections, the melody section and the rhythm section. For swing purposes, I maintain that the rhythm section, consisting of piano, string bass, guitar and drums, is much the more important of the 2, although if either section be poor, the perfect swing record cannot be obtained. The piano, as the leader of the rhythm section, must be considered the most important instrument in the band. In fact, it is almost the only instrument with which solo swing records can be made. I've asked Mr. Claude Benton to come down here as my guest, so that he can try to help me define the exact relation of the piano to the rest of the band. But before he joins in our conversation, I'll put on a record of Rocking in Rhythm, played by Duke Ellington and his orchestra. In this example, I'd like you to listen very closely to Duke's own performance at the piano.
it onto side 2, it would appear, for jazz idioms. Right, put a little wax on there.
Now, Mr. Bampton, do you agree so far?
Well, Leonard, I don't quite agree with this two-section business. The so-called melody section is just as important to swing as are the rhythm instruments.
I agree up to a point. But while a good rhythm section can inspire a poor soloist, you'll rarely find the reverse happening. I wonder whether you agree with my theory that a large amount of Ellington's swing comes from those percussive little thumps he gives on the piano. They were quite clearly heard in Rocking in Rhythm.
Yes, I definitely agree there, but you hear them even more clearly in Duke's famous Tiger Rag. If you like, I will play the piano part on my own first, and then we'll have a chorus from the record.
I wish you would.
Well, it goes something like this. You see, the left hand supports the string bass, the right hand the guitar, and those thumps, as you call them, can be likened to brass interjections.
I see. Now I'll play the alto chorus from the record, and our friends on the other side of the microphone can pick up the piano part for themselves. So if for the purpose of argument we take Duke's playing as ideal swing piano playing, you would say that the pianist should be there all the time, but not heard too much.
Exactly. A rhythm section consisting of guitar, bass and drums is quite satisfactory in the usual way, and the absence of a pianist hardly noticeable. Although I would never say that the pianist is not the most important member of the rhythm section.
A bit Irish, that, isn't it?
Well, the pianist is there to provide the basic groundwork, and he should not rush about the piano when a solo is being taken by another member of the band, and the same thing goes for ensemble passages.
I see. Now could you give us some idea of how swing solo piano passages are built up?
Yes, I'd like to. The usual plan is for the left hand to take over the functions of both string bass and guitar. The bass on the first and third beats of the bar, and the guitar on the second and fourth beats. Like this. The right hand is then free to work out the pianist's variations on the tune. Here again, the effect of orchestral colour is obtained by imitating the styles of the brass or sax section or solo instruments, you see. Shall I play a few bars of St. Louis Blues to show what I mean?
Yes, please.
Here's a solo thump. Here's the brass section.
That's fine. Now we've just got time to play a record of a piano solo. What do you suggest?
What about Garland Wilson's Blues in B flat?
Okay, here it is. Well, thanks very much, Claude. I hope you'll come down to help me with a later record in this series.
Thanks, Lord. I'd like to.
6 bells.
Right, on to part 2, which may be a bit Irish, as the man put it. You'll notice that Leonard Hibbs was lower middle class, and the other bloke was working class. I should have pointed that out to you. Oh, right, I'll just change the needle. Right, part 2, side 3 rather. Here we go.
On the last record, I stressed the importance of what is known as the rhythm section in a dance band. I've already said that the rhythm section consists of piano, guitar, or banjo of course, string bass and drums. These four instruments are essential to almost every combination of swing music makers. All but the very smallest of modern swing bands include at least one performer on each of these instruments. I think I'm on fairly safe ground when I say that the story of the development of the rhythm section is also the story of the development of the performance of swing music, as distinct from its composition. The examples I have chosen to illustrate the early stages of development are from what are called American race records. In parentheses, I would like to say that the following is only a broad outline of jazz development and is not intended as a literal history. In the early days, nearly every jazz band consisted of piano, clarinet, trumpet, drums and trombone, and generally a banjo. The resultant noises were, startling as they were at the time, very much of a muchness, and this example is a fair one of these noises. When it was not taking a solo part, the trombone was used entirely as a rhythm instrument. This 5 or 6 piece instrumentation retained its popularity right up to 1928, when Red Nichols and Big Spiderdick and their band placed it on a pinnacle which left no room for further exploitation. Meanwhile, the first attempts to give weight to the rhythm section were to support or even to supplant the two-in-a-bar trombone by the aid of a brass bass or sousaphone. I rather imagine that early efforts in this direction were on these lines. Incidentally, I believe that's the first time that the Negro trumpet player Gabbo Smith has been heard on a British record. Well, for some while all jazz performances were improvised, but there came a time when some form of pre-arranged orchestration was necessary. Now I'd like you to hear what I like to think is a typical example of an early form of orchestration, or arrangement as they're called. You'll see, or rather you'll hear, that the rhythm section has now reached the same size as that of today, with the one important difference. Although a string bass is now used, the stalwarts of those days were still using a brass bass, and it must be added, they were using it with very little imagination.
Right, on that prejudice note, we'll turn over to side 4. Let's have a look. Yes. Here we go.
Before the sousaphone was finally superseded, Duke Ellington showed us in Black and Tan Fantasy to what effect this cumbersome instrument could be used. Compare this short movement from the fantasy with the preceding examples. I'm afraid I don't know exactly when a string bass was first used, but I regard that moment as one of the really important occasions in jazz. Immediately, jazz music flowed more easily. It had a lilt and a swing. The other members of the section were inspired by its firm 4-in-a-bar beats, and jazz music became more unified than ever it had been before. Duke Ellington had opened up fresh vistas of tonal colour by scoring for brass and saxophones as one rather than two separate sections. And now the abolition of the ponderous gruntings of the brass bass set the feet of jazz firmly on the road to a new freedom. Just how that freedom has been used and abused, I will explain in later records, but to round off this chapter I'll play 3 more examples. First comes a passage from a record that created a tremendous sensation when it first appeared in 1931, the Cataloma Band's White Jazz. I've chosen it chiefly for the definition of the string bass, but those who scoff these days at this band would do well to remember the significance of this record. Now for 2 glorious examples of swing music. First, Buster Bailey's exciting clarinet chorus from Fletcher Henderson's record Hotter Than Hell. We're now listening to Chick Webb and his orchestra playing It's Over Because We're Through, and these boys will tell you much more about swing than ever I can.
Right, on to side 5. Yes. Well, I'll just turn the, change the needle. Right, here we go.
You may remember that on the first record, Claude Bampton said that the melody section was of equal importance to swing as are the rhythm instruments. At that time, I didn't think it wise that I should cover too much ground at first. I wanted you to listen only to the rhythm sections of the examples I played. However, I hope that by now I have helped tell you the difference between a rhythm section that helps the soloist and one that's a hindrance. For instance, in either of the 2 splendid examples that include the second side of the second record, the rhythm sections are a tremendous help to the melody instrument, while in the second example on the first side of the same record, the rhythm section was a definite hindrance. These 2 instances may seem to you to be extreme, but I can assure you that in spite of the improved instrumentation, there are many performers today who are even more dull and plodding than was the performer on the sousaphone and the latter instance. Swing is not something that can be taught or bought, it must be felt. Neither is it an exclusive feature of jazz music, or indeed any other kind of music. Occasionally one sees workers in the most humdrum jobs, such as typists or bricklayers, who work with a swing. And they are happy because they can work that way. They get more work done with less energy. I don't know whether you've ever ridden a bicycle, but if you have, you'll remember how after the first few minutes you achieve a certain swing, and one pedal follows the other round quite easily and naturally, and for a time cycling is the simplest thing in the world. And then suddenly something happens which breaks the easy, regular motion, and the going seems twice as hard and tiring, because you've lost the swing of it. Those last few words sum up the whole point, which is getting into the swing of a thing, no matter what that thing may be. Where swing music is concerned, some musicians swing quite naturally from the start. For the great majority, It's a matter of intense hard work, until one day they discover how to swing as they play. And once they learn that secret, everything else about their music is right. But even then you only get swing music when every man in the band is swinging together. It's no good just one or two swinging and trying to carry the rest of the band with them. Remember that when you judge a record. Listen to it several times. And by listen, I mean listen, hard, all the time. Listen to the drums, guitar, piano and string bass. Listen to the brass and the saxophone. Play the record once for each instrument, so that you can really say that you've heard it. And listen to the way in which each part dovetails into the general pattern of sound. And now listen to some examples. The first is comparatively easy listening. Red Nichols' bugle call Rag. First we hear the bugle call played by Red and Miss Mole on trumpet and trombone in harmony. Then the first chorus is shared by all the pennies. Listen to the way in which the tune is thrown from one instrument to another. Trumpet, clarinet, violin, guitar and trombone, they all take their share. Listen also to the sixth person playing mechanically tuned timpani. In the second chorus we hear Venuti on Lang, that perfect combination, with more of six persons' deft work in the background.
Right, on to the last side.
Here's another example by a small orchestra in which the most important member is Louis Armstrong, trumpet. The tune he is playing is called Melancholy. Now for two widely contrasted tenor saxophone solos. The first by that great artist Coleman Hawkins, who will be heard playing the first section of Arabesque by Spike Hughes. This is definitely not so easy to listen to if you were to hear all that the composer wants you to hear. I'm quoting Spike himself when I say that there are two themes. The one around which Hawkins weaves his Arabesque solos, and another which is in itself the Arabesque. The first theme appears as a background, and Hawkins, elaborating a melody suggested in the score, introduces the second theme against it for 16 bars. In the next 8 bars, the background ceases to have any thematic value, and Hawkins' melody stands by itself. The last 8 bars that I shall play bring the first section to an end with the two themes combined as at the beginning. Here it is. The next tenor saxophone solo is rather different swing music, being based on Handel's famous blues tune, Loveless Love. The band is Noble Thistles, and the swing is terrific. You'll have noticed how in the last two examples the music has obviously been orchestrated or arranged in advance. The brass figures in Loveless Love, for instance. On the next record in this series, I want to analyse a typical arrangement and try to show you how it's built up. But to conclude this chapter, I'll play a passage from Fanfare by Spike Hughes and his Negro Orchestra. On the label it says, Traditional Arranged Hughes. When you hear it, you'll realise why the honest Mr. Hughes disclaims responsibility. It's just another set of variations on the age-old 12-bar blues. And while you're listening, just hum to yourself any blues tune that comes to mind. The Bird Blues, Basin Street or Beale Street Blues, or even Loveless Love.
Well, there we are, viewers. That's all I've got. These records came in with a collection last week, and I think I've been through all of them, and I've only got 3 records. There may have been more in the set. Anyway, I don't know much about jazz, as you may have guessed, but you do. What was he saying? The right things. Was he right? Was he wrong? All I can say is certainly when all the jazz players on a jazz record swing together, it makes a better record. A bit like the old Eton Boating song. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Thank you and goodbye.